I'm Sue Scarrett. I'm from the Darien Library. I'm happy to introduce Jim Cameron tonight. Our guest is Jim Cameron, a longtime commuter advocate and commentator on transportation issues in the state. Born and raised in Toronto, Jim attended Lehigh University and then worked in broadcasting and journalism in Hartford, Boston, and New York City. He is the recipient of the George Foster Peabody Award for his work at NBC News. In 1993, he joined the Connecticut Metro-North Rail Commuter Council, where he served 11 years as vice chairman and 4 years as chairman. Since 2003, he has authored a weekly newspaper column and a blog, Getting There, which appears each Monday in the 6 Hearst daily newspapers across Connecticut, including the Stamford Advocate and the Darien Times. He is also the author of a new book, Off the Record, Confessions of a Media Consultant. He's lived in Darien for 25 years, where he serves as program director for the town's government TV station, Darien TV 79. He also serves on the Merritt Parkway Conservancy and Darien's representative town meeting, but he says he has no aspirations for a higher office. The only thing I'm running for is the train, he says. So without further ado, I introduce Jim Cameron.
Thank you, Sue. I appreciate the warm welcome. It's always great to come back to the Darien Library. Appreciate you hosting this evening as well, too. So let me just set up my screen here so I can show you what's going to be happening. And I'm going to talk through some PowerPoint, and then we're going to have plenty of time to handle questions at the conclusion of the evening as well, too. Let's see now. There we go. Great. Okay. So as I go along, if you have questions, what I'm going to suggest is jot them down, write some notes, and then we're going to use the chat function to send those questions to Sue, who will pose them to me at the end of the presentation. So as Sue mentioned, I am a columnist. I once frightened people in Greenwich by saying I'm an avowed columnist, and they thought I said communist. The difference between a columnist and a reporter is subtle. I try to make sure that the opinions that I offer, which is what a columnist does in terms of commentary, are based on facts. And my inspiration for this is Tom Friedman from the New York Times, who says he's either in the heating business or the lighting business. And by that, he means I'm either writing things to get people up to a boil, get them angry, or shed some light, some facts on things to elucidate them and bring them up with to the veracity of the truth. So as I go through this evening, I'm going to differentiate fact from opinion as best I can. My commuter advocacy went on for 19 years on the Metro-North Commuter Rail Council, and I was the go-to guy for the media to get an opinion or what was wrong with the railroad, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how that column that I write now for Hearst actually got started. So here's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to talk a little bit about where we were on the railroad and on transportation before COVID, what's happened since, how we are and the railroad and operating agencies are adapting, some dangers that I think lie ahead, and maybe some alternatives that we can detour around those dangers, and then we'll have time for Q&A. My hypothesis is that we're in the eye of a hurricane. And you know that the eye of a hurricane is that calm spot between torrential rain and wind that we've all gone through since March when COVID started. We actually went through an actual hurricane last month as well, too. There were times back in March when things were really dark, when there were 800 people a day dying in New York City. That's diminished, but I think that the hurricane is going to pass over us. This quiet spot is going to be gone soon, and we're going to be in for more really bad weather. And I'm going to explain what that consists of. So let's talk about the enemy here, COVID-19. The United States has the highest number of COVID cases in the world. And this map shows it pretty well. The dark areas are the most infected. The lighter areas, my homeland of Canada, not so infected. It is a potentially lethal virus. In the United States, we've already seen over 6 million cases and 189,000 people have died. In Connecticut, we've had 4,500 deaths. And in Fairfield County alone, 1,400 deaths. This is a dangerous opponent, if you will, the enemy that lurks outside. And I think that we've got to do everything we can. I know I'm in an at-risk group because of my age to try and stay alive and still be able to carry on our lives. Let's talk first about the airports. The airports are in serious trouble. Bradley Airport in Hartford has seen passenger traffic down 80%, partly because Connecticut has very strict rules. If you come into this state from any one of, I think it's up to like 37 states now, you have to go into quarantine for 14 days and you got to fill out a piece of paper. And if you don't follow those rules, you can be fined. And that's like, okay, here's the welcome mat. Welcome to Hartford. Welcome to Connecticut, where the COVID rate is very low. And we want to keep it that way. But a lot of people are not going to choose that as the destination. Maybe they'll come into Tweed Airport in New Haven. American Airlines has already suspended flights to one of the cities, and they're going to suspend to Philadelphia starting in October. Sikorsky Airport in Bridgeport has no commercial flights. They've been talking about extending the runways there forever, which leaves White Plains as an alternative. It seems to be moving along fairly well, serving Atlanta, Charlotte, Orlando, Detroit, Fort Myers, Fort Lauderdale, Tampa, etc. But I think that obviously the place of choice, if you're really going to want to fly, and that ain't me right now, is going to one of the New York City airports. Let's talk about the trains. My favorite topic, talking about the trains. Before COVID-19 hit on Metro-North in March of 2020, we were looking at something like 3+ million passengers a month carried on Metro-North, 97% on time. And to their credit, 100% of all the cars were available, and so crowded they were that they were standing room only conditions. Since COVID, we have gone down considerably in ridership, maybe 218,000 monthly riders. On-time performance has gone up, and all those cars are still available. Ridership is now down about 80%. It may be ticking up a little bit this week. After Labor Day, I'm seeing a little more activity, and I'm hearing anecdotally of a few more people going back to work in New York City, but it's still down precipitously. Here's the old days. Yep, standing room only on Metro-North at rush hour. How do you like to be paying $400 a month to commute like this? Stand for an hour and a quarter. Post-COVID or during COVID, plenty of empty seats. And that's probably good news if you want to attract people to come back, because you want them to be able to spread out. You want them to be able to feel comfortable. This iconic cover of the New Yorker magazine from the end of March showing Grand Central, about as empty as it's ever been. This is a real picture taken about the same time. And it's a very eerie place, empty as it is. So here's what Metro-North's been doing to try and encourage people to come back. They have this mascot. I don't know if you've ever seen him. His name is Metro Man, and he looks like a robot. And he's been out there passing out masks to everybody at the stations and on the trains in Grand Central, etc. They actually have been trying to teach people how to wear masks, and wearing it around your neck like it's a scarf, not enough. It's got to be over the nose and the mouth. And the requirement is you're supposed to wear that mask at all times on the buses, on the subways, and on Metro-North. That's at least the rule. On the subways, they've been experimenting with using ultraviolet light to disinfect cars. They haven't done that yet on Metro-North. Instead, they're out there spraying surfaces and cleaning them. And again, the reports I get from people who have come back to ride the trains is they've never been cleaner. They've never seen the trains quite this clean. Hand sanitizer at the train stations for free. Here's what Grand Central looked like at rush hour before COVID-19. This is a train from Danbury, I think, coming in. And here's what it looks like these days. Many smaller number, a much smaller ridership, but compliance with the masks seems to be pretty good. About 90% compliance is what I'm told. Now, I'm working on a column, just to give you a tease, I'm working on a column for a week or so from now about the issue of compliance of masks on the train, because 90% is not enough. All it takes is one person on that train car not wearing a mask who coughs or sneezes and is virus positive, and that's spread through the entire car. The HVAC system is not sufficient enough. The filters are not strong enough to stop the germs from traveling. So everybody's got to be wearing the masks. And Metro-North, I do not think, is doing a good enough job right now at enforcing that. The conductors are not enforcing it, and they're leaving it to the MTA police, which are not on the trains. Now, the large number of people that are not taking the train and working from home are actually saving an awful lot of money. CNN Business said in June, driving in the United States was down by 37 billion miles. That averages out to something like $758 million in cost savings to automobile owners on a daily basis for gasoline, car maintenance, repairs. And I'm not sure how they computed the time of the value of my time, but by not having to commute, the average commuter in the United States is saving something like 54 minutes a day. Well, 54 minutes isn't even enough to get you into Grand Central. So you can double that number for people that are not going into Manhattan now and taking the train. They're staying home and working and being much more productive, probably. And then the other societal cost is less pollution and less congestion on the highway. So let me tell you about this guy, Joe Colangelo, and what COVID has done to him. Joe started a company based in New Jersey, which has come into Connecticut. And the idea was he wanted to lease parking spaces for commuters in towns where the parking lots were oversold. And the service was called Boxcar. And he developed an app, and he would go to places like churches and funeral parlors, and in Darien's case, the storage area near Hollow Tree Ridge Road. And you would have an app on your phone, and you could just reserve a parking spot. And it cost about the same as paying for day parking as well, too. Well, that business was very successful for a while, but not after parking evaporated from the train stations. So what he did was he pivoted. He moved from being in the parking and the transit business into the grocery business and started showing drive-in movies at empty parking lots. And that was, successful for about a month or two. And now he is out of business. Smart guy. I think he'll come back. He'll find something else to do. Fairfield, this is their parking lot in 2010, full up. And this is what Norotan Heights looked like the other day on a weekday morning, pretty empty. So if you've been waiting for that monthly parking pass to get, there's probably not much of a wait right now. I don't know if many people are going to be re-upping for that as well, too. The effect of COVID on the local real estate market has been profound. You've probably heard a lot about these city people that are leaving the city and evacuating the city, and they're either moving out to the Hamptons full-time, or a lot of them are coming up to Connecticut. So the real estate market up in this case, Greenwich, for single-family homes has not been this hot in many, many years. The sales are off the charts. I mean, the houses are getting multiple bids. They aren't listed for more than a day or two. It's a good time to sell your house if you really want to. I don't know where you want to go. I'm not going anywhere right now. The opposite of this is New York City, where there's been a huge exodus of people from the city who at least have the economic ability to leave and move someplace else. And what that has meant, according to the New York Times, is the vacancy rate has climbed and rents have dropped. In the case of Manhattan, I think this is a Manhattan number alone, 67,000 empty apartments were available in July. And the median price, I guess, for a one-bedroom was $3,100. That's down 10%. The post office has seen 10,000 New Yorkers change their addresses to Connecticut zip codes in the first 3 months of the pandemic versus about 10% of that number in the same period in 2019. So what does all this mean? With these changing residential and work and commuting patterns, there's going to be a profound effect on transportation in Connecticut. The big question is, do we still need, more importantly, can we afford the frequency of service that we have now on Metro-North? 3 or 4 trains an hour in rush hour and at least 2 trains an hour to most stations outside of rush hour. Those trains are empty. How can the public transit agencies absorb these huge operating losses? As the chairman of MTA, the parent of Metro-North, put it, the challenges are existential in scope. The MTA is projecting a $16 billion deficit by 2024. That's even after budget cuts. And the alternatives to close that budget deficit, none of them are attractive. The loss projections by MTA include loss of fares, reduced subsidies, tolls paid by motorists, and the increased cost of going out and disinfecting trains and handing out masks and putting sanitizer on every platform as well too. So what are the alternatives? They're not going to shut the railroad down. The railroad service is essential to a lot of people. The federal government has yet to step up and answer a lot of transit agencies' cry for help. And I assume they will at some point along the way. But the more immediate alternatives probably are threefold: laying off staff, reducing train service, and perhaps even increasing the fares. The doomsday scenarios that the New York Times, the MTA announced last week on the subway system would see an increase in wait time by 8 minutes between subway trains, 15 minutes for buses. They're talking about cutting Metro-North and Long Island Railroad service to once an hour or once every 2 hours. The city's subway system's signal system, which is in desperate need of upgrade, that would all be put on hold. And they're talking about draconian fare hikes. What are the fares like today? Well, from Darien to Grand Central, if you're doing a walk-up fare to the ticket machine, it's $15.25 one way. A 10 trip, 10 times that. A monthly ticket, they're not selling many of those these days, $3.35 a month. But the fares on Metro-North have already gone up in the past 20 years, 53%, way ahead of the rate of inflation. Bus fares have gone up 75%. The fares we pay on Metro-North are the highest fares of any commuter railroad in the United States. And every time there's a fare increase, there's got to be a public hearing. And I've referred to these in my column as political theater. Here's a commuter standing at the microphone, the guy with his finger over his mouth gesturing, please stop talking, is Jim Redeker. He was the commissioner of the DOT, and he had to go through this political theater every time there was going to be a fare increase. Not that the hearing changed anything. The fare increase was baked into the budget. They had to go through the motions, so commuters would scream and yell and swear that they were never going to take the train again. Fare increase still went through. Here's another guy, Bob Lyon. He's a member of the Board of Reps in Stamford. He was talking in one of those things, and this guy with the bald head down in the corner playing with his iPhone is me tweeting the fare increase hearing to my followers on Twitter. Why are the fares so high? Well, the Farebox Return is what determines how much of the fare is actually covering the cost of the ride. So if it costs Metro-North, let's say $20 to carry me from Darien to Grand Central, the Farebox Return is the percent of the actual cost that I pay for my ticket in the fare. The rest is a subsidy. Now, the Farebox Return on the Long Island Railroad is 46%. That means they have a 54% subsidy. New Jersey Transit, it's about 50-50. Half of the actual cost is borne by the ticket holder. On the MBTA up in Boston, it's about the same, 50-50. But in Metro-North's case, the Farebox Return is 72%. So we pay more of the actual cost of the ride than any other commuter railroad in the United States. But we don't cover all the costs as they are. I mean, the Metro-North system is not turning a profit. They were losing less money than they used to as the fares went up. But since the ridership evaporated, they're just hemorrhaging money. Running a railroad is expensive. The main line of Metro-North, the subsidy in Connecticut is borne 60-40, 60% by Connecticut and 40% by New York. The subsidy on the New Haven line in Westchester County is borne 60% by New York and 40% by Connecticut. But on the branch lines in Connecticut, 100% of that cost, that subsidy, is paid by the state. So even before COVID, mainline trains were subsidizing every trip per passenger at the rate of $3.25. On the New Canaan branch, which is pretty short, $4.42 subsidy per passenger per trip. The Danbury branch, over $17. The Waterbury branch, $24. Shoreline East, which runs from New Haven to New London, almost $50 subsidy per passenger per trip, exceeded only by the new Hartford line, which runs from New Haven through Hartford up to Springfield, where the subsidy is almost $56 per passenger. Now, there's a way of cutting that subsidy by increasing ridership. If they offered better service on some of these branch lines, people may not be driving, they might be taking the train, and the subsidy would go down. I mean, but now the subsidies are just at, stratospheric levels. So what's MTA, the parent of Metro-North, doing to reduce costs? Some things are adjustable and some things are not. Long-term projects that they have, like the East Side Access Project to bring the Long Island Railroad into Grand Central underneath Park Avenue, that's probably going to be put on hold. That was a $4.3 billion project that was supposed to be finished in 2009. The budget went to over $11 billion, and they thought it might be finished in 2 years. But then again, maybe not. I'm going to show you some pictures of this project in a moment. The LaGuardia Air Train, $2 billion. The subway signal system replacement, $7 billion. Pretty soon you're talking about real money here. And also remember that some of the money that MTA was expecting was going to come from New York City's congestion pricing plan, which was going to start charging tolls to cars coming into Midtown Manhattan. That was supposed to start this December, and no one's quite sure what the status of that is right now. Let's take a look at this East Side Access Project, because it is just monumental. This was a plan to bring underneath the East River the Long Island Railroad, some Long Island Railroad trains that are coming in from the right, that's in where Queens and Brooklyn is, and have them come in a new tunnel dug underneath the existing tunnel on Park Avenue to a brand new terminal underneath Grand Central. I mean, 4 or 5 stories down from street level underneath Vanderbilt Avenue. I got a tour of this thing a few years ago, and it was something like out of a science fiction movie. You can see against the back wall there are 4 tubes, 4 circles. That's where the 4 tracks that are coming in from the Long Island Railroad would emerge to a double level platform. And on the left-hand side of the picture, right about, on the left-hand side, you could see the access routes. And here's an artist rendering of what Grand Central will look like to get down to this new lower level where the Long Island Railroad will come in. You go down an escalator to a mezzanine. You go down from the mezzanine down into the bowels of the earth, deep into the granite schist of Manhattan. And there are the 4 tracks where the Long Island Railroad trains will emerge. Again, this project is way late and way over budget, and I think this may be put on hold. They just don't have the money. So let's talk about the bus. Mass transit in this state, more people ride the bus than take the train. And I'm talking about all the bus service across the state. Pre-COVID, 40 million rides a year, compared to the Metro-North was at 3.1 million a month. And the people that ride the bus, let's take these examples from the Greater Bridgeport Transit District. They had 17,000 daily passengers. That's 5 million passengers a year. And 20% of them were going to or from the train station. A lot of them owned cars, but they preferred to take the bus, maybe because they didn't want to pay for parking, or they was more convenient. And the bus was pretty sweet. They had, they had charging plugs at the seat. There was Wi-Fi on the bus, no Wi-Fi on Metro-North. They had 57 buses, 32 of them were hybrid, and they're about to acquire all electric buses as well, too, that'll do 250 miles on one overnight charge. No bus. Here's an example of a community. This is the town of Southington. That's that little red dot in the map in the upper right-hand corner. It's technically a suburb of Hartford, and they've had no bus service since 1969. But they were considering adding bus service, and they were the only town about this size that did not have bus service. And in effect, their taxes, those town taxes, were helping subsidize bus service in other parts of the state. So they had the Commission on Disabilities in that town look at who might use the benefit or might benefit from the use of the bus. The disabled, retirees, young people, those people who shouldn't be driving or maybe can't be driving. And they identified like 13% of the population was in one of those categories of the 43,000 residents. That's a pretty good potential sized ridership right there. And if they had bus service, they would also then be able to offer door-to-door paratransit service. They also felt that bus service would attract new businesses and new jobs. But then a local resident wrote a letter to the editor of the weekly newspaper, the Southington Observer, and he commented, towns that have bus service are towns that frankly have a lesser quality of people. James Pappas was his name, and he actually said that. I'm not going to get into the politics of something like that, but I think that's, I strongly disagree. To imply that lesser quality people are the only ones that take the bus means that this gentleman has not seen the population that would benefit from it. So let's get back on the roads. We've talked about the trains, the airports, the buses. What about the highways? Highway traffic, especially on 95 and the Merritts, seems to be coming back to pre-COVID levels at rush hour. But overall, the gasoline tax revenues, which subsidize mass transit and highway repairs, are down, down, down. People are buying less because they're driving less. The Special Transportation Fund, which pays for repair of our highways, which subsidizes mass transit, will be insolvent by 2021. A couple of years ago, they thought that might be, 2024. They have a few years to figure out how they're going to solve all this. If the Special Transportation Fund goes into the red, that means that the state of Connecticut cannot issue bonding for anything, for housing, for sewage treatment plants, because the state bonding authority will be looking at this red ink sword of Damocles hanging over our heads. How are we going to make the Special Transportation Fund work if we don't have the money that's coming in? It's estimated that every dollar in deferred expenses by holding off on repairing that bridge or repairing that road ends up in $4 in eventual costs. The problem is that the legislature isn't talking about this. Hard to believe we're in an election year and nobody is talking about the Special Transportation Fund. The legislature has been AWOL since one special session over the middle of the summer. They passed the budget in April, they went home, they came back, they passed an omnibus police reform bill, and they've gone home. And I don't hear anybody asking questions at debates or rallies. I mean, what's going How are we going to get the special transportation fund going again? Because the alternatives, none of them are attractive, and no legislator going into this election wants to commit him or herself to what these funding alternatives are. What are the answers? Well, when Governor Malloy came up with his $100 billion 30-year Let's Go CT plan, he didn't want his fingerprints over the funding of that panel either, or those proposals. So what he did was what they always do in Hartford. He created a blue ribbon panel to study it. And this blue ribbon panel looked at all of the alternatives. They looked at all of them, and they basically said, we got to employ all of these alternatives to fund transportation, to keep the bridges from falling down, to keep the trains running. The first recommendation they had was they got to put a lockbox on the Special Transportation Fund, which had been treated like a petty cash box by the legislature for many years. Put a lockbox on it. That passed overwhelmingly, I think by 80+% in the November 2018 elections as a constitutional amendment. That passed. People voted for that. They said, yeah, if you're going to raise money for transportation, I need to know that it's only going to be spent on transportation. It's not going to be spent on anything else. They also suggested raising the gasoline tax, 2 cents a year for 7 years. You may remember back in 1997, they lowered the gasoline tax, the legislature did, 14 cents a gallon. Very popular move by the legislature. Very stupid move by the legislature, because that loss of gasoline tax revenue over these past now 23 years is what's driven the Special Transportation Fund into the red. So slowly raise it back. New Jersey just raised its gasoline tax 8 cents a gallon a couple of weeks ago. Nobody seemed to notice. They also suggested raising the gross receipts tax on other types of petroleum by 1%. There was even a suggestion that they look at the idea of a vehicle miles tax, where you would have your odometer checked every 2 years when you go for your emissions check, and the state would send you a check saying, okay, last year you drove 10,000 miles, here's a bill. This year you only drove 5,000 miles. You get a bill that's a little bit less. That idea was so unpopular that the legislature passed a bill prohibiting the Department of Transportation from even studying the idea, even though it is widely used in Oregon and California and Europe. I'll say it, I don't have high respect for many of the people in the legislature. Gutless weasels in the legislature were so afraid of doing anything that smacked of a tax increase, or that Big Brother might know how many miles you've driven. They just put their heads in the sand and said, you can't even study this particular idea. But they also said, you know what, this special finance panel said, maybe we should do tolls. This was a huge debate. Do you remember it was a year ago we were talking about tolls? And it was a huge debate, and there was a grassroots organization called No Tolls CT, started by a gentleman out of Stanford. I have a lot of respect for what he did in terms of organizing people in opposition to the idea of tolling. He did not offer an alternative, though. And finally, the legislature, even though the Democrats were in the majority, the governor threw his hands up in the air and said, forget about it. We're not going to have tolls. We'll just bond all of this. Well, you can't bond anything if the Special Transportation Fund is going to be that far in the red. And I ask somewhat rhetorically, aren't we already paying tolls? This cartoon says, welcome to Connecticut, tolls now in effect, blown tire, $200, bent rim, $399, damaged suspension. I had a guy at one of these talks who told me that he broke an axle up on I-84 in Danbury and it cost him $2,000. Well, you're going to pay one way or the other. You know, you can either pay a toll and have the roads get fixed, or you can pay Midas Muffler and let them, you know, fix your car if it's broken from driving over these roads. So I hate to be so gloomy and doomy, but that's my take on, you know, what the current status is and what the alternatives look like. I hope you will check out my column in the newspaper. Here are my email contacts as well, too. And yes, I have written a book. It's at the Darien Library, in addition to being on Amazon and being sold at Barrett's bookstore. And it has nothing to do with transportation whatsoever. It's all about my career as a media consultant. But it's a fun read as well, too. True stories. So that's my presentation. Let me see if I can get back into unsharing the screen and see if Sue has had any questions pop up.
Yes.
And be
Yes.
happy to answer your questions.
Okay, I have one.
Good.
It is, how do you think the high cost of branch lines will affect transit-oriented development on those lines?
Okay, so transit-oriented development is a very hot topic these days, and what it implies is, why not build apartments and condos and offices near the train stations, encouraging people to live close to where they work, or they can catch a train to go to where it is they work. And the state has a lot of interest in this, because not only would it increase the use of the train stations and the ridership on the trains, but it will also increase the value of the land in those towns. Darien is a good example. The Norotan Heights train station, whenever they finish the construction across from it, is going to be a beautiful example of TOD, transit-oriented development. But the land value increase is going to be enjoyed by the town, not by the Department of Transportation or the state, which builds the station. The state is actually looking at ideas of passing a bill that would give the state control over, by eminent domain, all land within a half mile of every train and bus station. They would stop local zoning from being in effect there. And they want to be able to enjoy some of the improved tax revenues that come from those developments and their success. The most expensive of the branch lines is perhaps the one that shows the most success so far with TOD, and that's the Hartford line that runs from New Haven to Hartford to Springfield. They built a number of new stations. I think it's now maybe a year and a half old. Ridership before COVID was huge. It was much higher than they thought it was going to be. And a lot of that is due to the fact that there are nice developments that are built around the train stations themselves. So I think TOD is going to be a very important trend, but this assumes that we are commuting. This assumes that, after we have a vaccine and it's all safe for us to go out again, that we actually will get back on a train or in our car and go to the office. Maybe we don't need to do that. Maybe we are just as productive working from home. Maybe you only go into the city once or twice a week instead of 5 days a week. So TOD, I think, is hanging in the balance as well, too.
Okay.
So
I have a next one. Do you ever see an option for the privatization of the trains, not subways, but Metro-North as an example?
No. If the railroad were capable of turning a profit, even before COVID hit, okay? If the railroad were capable of making a profit, it would be run as a for-profit organization, and it would have never been turned over to the state to operate as a utility. The New Haven Railroad was a for-profit railroad until they lost their passenger business and the freight business went away. And that's why the state and the city, in the case of MTA, run those systems. No, I think there might be opportunities, and this again is based on all kind of pre-COVID assumptions of ridership. I think there may be opportunities for privatizing parts of Amtrak. Either having Amtrak see competition from private railroads that run on the same tracks and offer a competing service, which I think would be great because competition would probably end up with better service. Italy is a good example of that. The Italian high-speed rail system has two competing railroads that run high-speed trains on the same tracks between the same train stations, with comparable fares, but different levels of service, comfort, etc. But I don't think we're going to see that on commuter rail. The fares would have to be, if you consider that the fares now at $15 one way only cover about 3/4 of the cost. To break even, the fares one way would have to go up 25%. And I don't know anyone that wants to pay 25% more for fares than what they're paying now. They probably think the fares are too high to begin with.
Okay.
Next.
All right. Next question is, I know that the DOT is seeking public comment on their 2021 statewide transportation improvement program. Do you have any thoughts on which projects should be priority in terms of the branch lines over Metro-North?
This is called the STIP, the Statewide Transportation Investment Program. And it is a requirement that every 4 years, the state come up with this list of where they're going to spend money, assuming they had money, on to invest in transportation. The priorities are determined by taking the local regional council of governments tips, their transportation investment programs, and looking at them and prioritizing them. I have tried to read the state-wide transportation improvement program. I can't make head or tail of the public document. I can't see any kind of projects in there that I recognize. I'm not giving up. Somebody has to read this document and understand it and see what's there and maybe what's missing. So I take that as my responsibility as your advocate to figure that out. There's still time for public comment on all that, but it is a mystery, wrapped in an enigma right now, as far as I'm concerned.
There is nothing else in the question comments box right now, Jim.
If you have a question, go to the chat box and type your question in there, and Sue will pose it, and we'd be happy to answer anything you want to know. Anything you always wanted to know about Metro-North? What's your worst nightmare of having ridden the trains? Do you think we'll ever see bullet trains? Oh, here we go.
Too crowded.
Too crowded. Well, not now, Cynthia. I think there's plenty of room on the trains.
Okay. Why does Metro-North pull empty cars?
Ah, okay. I've been asked this question since COVID started. Wouldn't it be cheaper to run shorter trains and save money? Not necessarily is the answer to that. The cost of running the extra cars is de minimis compared to the labor cost of coupling and uncoupling those cars. Also, by having empty seats in the trains, it encourages people to spread out. They're not going to be cheek to jowl. Now, I heard from a regular commuter today, this is the first day after Labor Day, who was on a rush hour train in the morning, and he said it was about 1/3 full. He felt comfortable. Everybody was masked. It was clean as a whistle. I think once you get above 40 or 50% full, it's going to seem less comfortable, and people are going to be reluctant to take the train. So believe it or not, the energy saving from running shorter trains is not that much, and it's very difficult to couple and uncouple trains, and that's why a lot of these trains just run as a complete 8-car, 10-car consist day in and day out.
Is the high-speed rail and associated private/public land acquisition still on the table?
Okay, so let's talk about high-speed rail. You might remember when Governor Lamont was inaugurated, he gave a speech, and he talked about something called 30-30-30. This was his, not only his, but others' dreams of having such high-speed service on the Northeast Corridor, Metro-North, that you could go from New York City to Stamford in 30 minutes, which now takes about 50. You can go from Stamford to New Haven in 30 minutes, which now takes about 50, maybe to an hour, 60 minutes. And you can go all the way from New Haven to Hartford in 30 minutes, which takes at least 45 to an hour as well, too. This was a pipe dream. It was based on the assumption that we could re-signal the tracks, straighten the tracks, improve the quality of service to be able to achieve those speeds. Now, the New Haven Railroad in its private days ran a lot of crack trains. They were a very well-run railroad. They never even came close to those kind of speeds. To offer true high-speed rail along the coast where it is now would be near impossible with the tracks that we have today. Those tracks have so many curves and banks in them that a train going from New York to Boston does the equivalent of making 6 complete circles. And anything but a straightaway is the enemy of speed. So actually Amtrak with the Federal Railroad Administration was looking at an alternative routing to bring high-speed intercity passenger trains to the area. And they came up with a proposal to build a new track basically along I-95. It was uncertain from their proposal whether they were talking about a raised track or one that was buried in the ground, but it would run straight through parts of Greenwich and Stamford and Darien. You can imagine where 95 is now, and then layering on another 2-track railroad on top of that with trains going 200 miles an hour. That idea did not go over terribly well. And as the commissioner of the DOT pointed out at the time, it doesn't matter because we don't have the money. We don't have the money to keep running what we have now, let alone invest in high-speed rail. You know, we're not going to see high-speed rail in my lifetime or my kids. You know, if you want to see high-speed rail, go to China. They got great high-speed rail, partly because as they opened up their high-speed rail between Beijing and Shanghai. I rode that in 2012, shortly after it opened. It was just incredible. I mean, the distance, the equivalent distance of New York to Miami, we did that in 5 hours. 5 hours. And the commissioner of the Department of Transportation, or the federal agency that runs transportation, went over to take a look at these trains, and he said to his Chinese hosts, "It's amazing what you can do in a country when you only need 3 people to make a decision." You know, they said, "We're going to run the train from here to there, and if there's anything in between, too bad. No environmental impact statements, grab the land from you." This is America. That doesn't happen. You don't start building high-speed rail without dealing with the environmental impact, the eminent domain cost of taking Gold Coast land, etc. So I don't think high-speed rail is in our future.
Okay. Here's another one. Do you think with the future lack of funding that the Norwalk Walk Bridge will continue to be built, or is it already funded?
So the Walk Bridge is the Victorian era bridge that crosses the mighty Norwalk River right near the Maritime Center. You're probably familiar with it. And it is a 4-track bridge. It is a lift bridge, 2 tracks on one side, 2 tracks on the other. And it has a problem. And that is that it is so old that sometimes, especially in the heat of the summer, it does not close. And, you know, heat expands and the tracks expand and they don't come together. They kind of fall on top of each other. There was one time, I think a couple of years ago, on a Friday afternoon, in the middle of the heat of the summer, that the bridge would not close, and the Northeast Corridor was in effect cut. Nothing could run anywhere across that bridge, so there was no train service between Washington, New York, and Boston. Not only commuter train service, but Amtrak as well too. That's going to cost about $1 billion to replace that bridge, and work has been underway for, I'm thinking, maybe 2 or 3 years now. And they haven't even really got to the main part of the work, which is replacing the bridge and its superstructure, et cetera. There's some other track and signal issues that are going into that as well too. That's already funded. That's going to move forward. I don't think that's going to be put on hold. That's, money that is, in effect already been spent. Now there are 4 other bridges like that further up the line, which are almost as old and definitely in need of some sort of replacement as well. Those projects may go on hold. I don't think that the DOT, if they don't have the money, I don't think the DOT is going to be able to carry on many of the projects that they would like to. That may be on that STIP, that statewide transportation improvement plan that I'm still promising you I'm going to read for my homework.
Okay.
Sue, any more?
Yes, I have. Let's see. Your opinion on union busting, which would go a long way to reducing overall costs. For example, when a boat has to get under the Greenwich drawbridge, I've seen a whole crew of men banging the ancient system with sledgehammers to align the tracks after the bridge is lowered back down.
Yeah. And that's the same thing they have to do at the Norwalk Bridge, the Walk Bridge in South Norwalk. When they're out there trying to close that bridge, they literally have guys with like a crew of 6 with sledgehammers trying to hammer those things back into shape. Is there feather bedding on the part of Metro-North unions or the DOT for that matter? I don't know. I know anecdotally, when you're driving along the highway and you see a crew of 6 guys standing by the side of the highway in orange vests, and 1 or 2 of them seem to be doing something and the others are sort of standing there looking at it, it's not, as we would say in the media trade, not good optics. But is that a union requirement? I don't really know. I think we're going to see push come to shove with Metro-North and its unions if they start reducing service substantially. That's going to mean significant layoffs of engineers. That already is starting to happen. I think that from what I hear from my engineer and conductor friends, morale is very low. These men and women have been out there working through the worst of this pandemic, sometimes without face masks, night and day. They're not getting as much overtime as they used to, and that doesn't make them happy. A lot of them are already retiring, I'm told. I think that the railroad is probably going to see some layoffs of its engineers and conductors, and that's not going to be a happy scene. And I'm not sure if DOT won't have to do the same thing. I'll pose a question that somebody asked me the other day. Do you think it's safe to ride Metro-North? And I think the answer is yes. I don't have to, so I haven't. But I think it would be safe to go on Metro-North now, as long as you were well masked and you kept a safe distance from everybody. I think ridership on Metro-North is coming back slowly because the traffic conditions are getting so onerous. I think when people had to, those that had to go back into the city at first were probably opting for driving because they were safe in their little cocoon, their little bubble. Maybe their boss was subsidizing parking in New York City. Parking in New York City can be as expensive as buying a monthly commutation pass on Metro-North. But when the traffic gets to be so horrible, that's when people start thinking, well, maybe I'll try going back to the train. So I think it is safe. I would certainly take a Metro-North train or even an Amtrak train before you'd get me on an airplane right now. I saw some other questions pop up.
Yeah, one Cynthia said this is not looking encouraging, and then also we have a funny one is who's going to win the World Series, but
I could opine on the Stanley Cup, but I don't follow the World Series much at all. Yeah, and I'm sorry, Cynthia. I hate to be Dr. Gloom here, but no one else is talking about this stuff. What really disappoints me and angers me is the people that are going to have to make the decisions. Our lawmakers they're missing in action. I mean, they're complaining that the governor has all these executive powers, I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I am unaffiliated. I'm as critical of one as I am of the other. But in all objectivity, I think Lamont's done a fairly good job. But where the hell has the legislature been? And I worry that the legislature, after the election, is going to start talking about tolls and tax increases and all kinds of unpopular things that are absolutely going to be necessary to make sure our bridges don't fall down and our trains keep operating. So I would encourage you, if your local League of Women Voters is holding some sort of a candidates night in the next month or so, ask these questions. Put these people on record. Are you in favor of tolls? If you're not in favor of tolls, what's the alternative? How are we going to pay for the transportation? Because that's the eye of the hurricane, folks. I mean, we're in this nice we had a nice summer. Everybody had a mellow summer. They all got maybe a little vacation, a few day trips here and there, but bam, we're back in the middle of it now. And we're coming up to an election, which is going to be ugly. We're looking at a lot of the layoffs that are coming and small businesses that are going to go under, and it's going to get very dark. And I worry about that.
Okay. So let's see.
Any other questions about the World Series?
Well, no, we had one about high-speed broadband having to get upgraded substantially to keep up with the increased work from home movement.
A good point. I didn't mention this in the introduction that Sue mentioned, read for you at the beginning. I'm on the Merritt Parkway Conservancy. I'm on the Darien RTM. I'm also on the Area 9 Cable Council because I run the town's government TV station, Channel 79. Altice, I think has done a fairly good job of maintaining service, the trees falling on the wires notwithstanding during the storm. But I asked that question early on when people were all Zooming their days away. Was the broadband service able to keep up with the demand? And they assured me that it was. Not through any miracle of Altice's, this is the new owners, the French company's work, but because they inherited this excellent system from Cablevision, which really built a world-class, dependable online internet system. So I think that will continue. They're spending a lot of money now upgrading it as well too.
Mm-hmm.
A final question or two.
Yep, I have the figures you have shared are Metro-North related.
Mm-hmm.
I assume New Jersey Transit and LIRR are in the same boat. So is the subway system, Amtrak. I don't see how this gets fixed. Tolls, tax increases, et cetera, will push people away, and the whole system collapses. It's kind of like a statement.
Well, it's a very good observation. Yes, I think that the loss of ridership on the Long Island Railroad and Jersey Transit are as high, if not, it may be a little higher in Connecticut because, as somebody pointed out, plumbers and construction workers cannot telecommute. If you live in Darien and you work in finance, you can go to your summer home in Vermont and be able to be keeping successful. But a lot of people that take mass transit in New Jersey and Long Island are less affluent. They have to go to their jobs. So their ridership may not be down as much as ours is. Amtrak ridership, again, I'm assuming that we get a vaccine at some point. I don't know when, or if I'm going to want to take the first doses that are out there. But I think we will get through this. I think there will be a cure that will be found for this disease. But even still, does that mean ridership will come back? Do you need to get on an airplane as one guy I know used to fly to London for lunch and come back the same day for one business meeting? That doesn't make sense to me. Nor does it make sense if I can work from my home productively, to get on a train and spend an hour each way in and out of New York City if I can work from home and be close to my family and be close to the beach and enjoy the great quality of life that I have in this town. So I think that we have gone through a tsunami-like change in perspective as a result of our adoption of this technology that doesn't bode well for the future of the mass in mass transit.
Wow.
And on that cheery note.
Jim, thank you very much for.
You're very welcome. Yeah, and if you have any questions, you can just search commuteractiongroup.org. Send me an email. I'd love to hear from you and let me know what your experiences are. Happy to answer questions and do what I can to advocate for you if you need some help with the operating agencies.
All right.
Thank you, Holas.
And with that, I will end this lovely Zoom meeting. Everybody
Peace.
have a good night. Peace out.